What's up guys, JZNES back again with another video. Today we're talking about Castlevania 4. Super Castlevania 4. So, yeah, like the Ego Raptor thing. Anyway, yeah, a lot of people love this game. It gets, as Ego Raptor would say, it gets a lot of cred from the gamer guys or whatever. Um, and I do agree with some of his criticisms of the game, but also I can see the merit of the game as well. I think that it's a pretty good game overall, but we'll get into that here in a second. I think that we should first talk about the classic NES trilogy of Castlevania games here. Convenient that Simon's Quest is kind of like scrunched between the other two, and you can't really see them when I do this, because it's the least good of all of them. Even it's probably the least good even with 4 in the picture, but we'll get into that. So just to talk about them briefly, I think that the first Castlevania is pretty much like the best Castlevania that I've played so far. I mean, not to spoil my opinions on 4 too much, but 4 is actually like a remake of this game, and I actually just kind of think this game is probably better in a lot of senses. Maybe just because I'm more attached to the NES stylings and whatnot. And I know that the game has its flaws, the jumping and whatnot, but this game didn't really improve on the platforming anyway, so, there's that. But I really like Castlevania 1. I know it's really hard. This game definitely kept that in some areas, and some of it was just pretty easy. So I felt like the challenge overall on Castlevania 4 here was fair enough. A little bit hard, but not. I don't think quite as hard as the old classic Castlevania games, especially not 3. But I think out of the Castlevania games so far, 1, 2, 3, 4, this would be my favorite one so far. It's just classic, it's the classic sort of NES game. You have all of the classic horror, Dracula, and you have Frankenstein and the Mummy, and all these classic horror elements of they're all the bosses, and it was the first one. I just felt like it was just really classic, and it had the right set of difficulty. It was really difficult. Like, Death was really difficult in this game. In Castlevania 4, he's not that hard, But in the original, everything was difficult, and it was quite an ordeal and an adventure to get through it. And it kind of set up everything, This is why Simon Belmont is so badass, because he played as him in this game. I mean, a lot of people say because he played as him in 4, which, okay, sure, okay, boomer, yeah, whatever. That meme's funny. Anyway, Simon's Quest, I got it. There's the whole angry video game nerd thing, whatever. He doesn't like the game that much. I understand. I get where his criticisms are coming from. I think that Simon's Quest has good parts and bad parts. I think that a lot of his the AVG and his criticisms are fair of the game, but overall, it's an okay game. It's not like a great game on NES, but it's not terrible either. I think it's pretty good. I mean, it has that classic Bloody Tears song or whatever, so that's pretty cool. There's just a lot of elements in here that don't really work so well. The platforming and this and that and secrets and, the bad translation and whatnot. So, it was interesting that they started to try to do like an open world, like side-scrolling kind of thing, like a Metroidvania sort of deal, because that sort of Castlevania game wouldn't really come into popularity until way later with Symphony of the Night. But this had elements of that, so it's very ambitious for its time. It just wasn't done very well, So I think it's a pretty decent game overall, though. Definitely not as good as any of the other NES ones. I like Castlevania 3 a lot. Dracula's Curse. I think that it's cool. And it's cool that it's a prequel and whatnot. I think that's great. I think the idea of adding more characters, different gameplay styles and whatnot, and letting you choose your characters and go on optional kind of side quests to find these characters and stuff, and you gotta have to choose between all of them. Of course, I chose Alucard because he's the best. But, you know, um, being able to have that kind of choice and that kind of freedom is really cool. And you can approach the game in a lot of different ways with the like 3 or 4 characters that you can choose. I think there's 3 of them. Sorry, because there's the free spell lady, and then there's the guy who climbs on walls and has the knife or whatever, and then there's Alucard who can turn into a bat and do a whole bunch of badass stuff. So you're gonna choose Alucard, of course. But yeah, and then Simon Belmont's a lot better in this game. They fixed a lot of the problems that the first one had, and they just kind of polished it up a little bit. But they like ramped up the difficulty to an insane level. This is like by far the hardest of the Castlevania games that I've played so far out of the first 4 here. And I don't think pretty much any of them are gonna ever top the legendary difficulty of this fucking game. Like it's insane. Like the final part of this game took me months to perfect or something. I don't know. Probably back in the day. I talked about it before. Maybe not on the channel, but on like Facebook or something. So I don't know. I've talked. I had struggles with this game for forever. It was like a Ninja Gaiden kind of bad for me. Like with Ninja Gaiden also, I took like at least a month to fucking beat the final boss. I got through the whole first part of the game to the final boss in a day. Like in no time. It's not that hard. But then when you get to the final boss, it's like, oh shit. That's the hard part with Ninja Gaiden. So, and Mega Man 8. That was another one that I had that kind of experience with. But this is one of these like, and Rayman, of course, that whole fucking game. This is like in the top 5 like hardest games I think that I probably played. I think it'd be in the top 10 if anything. So, but I like Castlevania 3. I just think it's a little too hard for its own good. But Castlevania 4 here, I think, is a pretty good balance between all of them. In a sense, it really doesn't have a lot from Simon's Quest, I wouldn't say, but like that's okay. I mean, we don't really need to take a lot from that, and we have the later games to take the Metroidvania stuff from that. So, but yeah, it takes a lot of the best elements of the other Castlevania games, like it kind of refines the gameplay. You can whip in a lot of directions now, like 8 directions, and you can do the little squiggly thing with your whip and stuff. That's really cool. That kind of stuff is great. Those are improvements to the game, is that kind of stuff. Like the whipping, and I mean, I guess the movement is a little bit better in some sense. I still feel like in some areas it's probably the level design, honestly, is they chose to make the level design better in the old Castlevania games. So like probably Castlevania 1, not as much in Castlevania 3. There was some cheap stuff in that game. I mean, 1 had its own cheap stuff, but it felt pretty, for the most part, it felt pretty justified overall. It wasn't like Ninja Gaiden or something where, they placed an enemy on a platform and they just expect you to figure out how to do it or whatever. 1 was pretty fair, I would say, overall. It was a little insane in some parts, but usually you just had to get good, kind of thing, which I appreciate. So 3 was a little too rough with that, and they also started doing a lot of the more platforming elements and stuff, which just is not what these games should be about, which I'll get into here in a second with 4. But I guess if let's talk about the positives. Let's go. So they've tightened some things up a little bit. That's fine. I'm not 100% in love with the controls, just because I don't think... I think... Well, I guess I'll talk about that in the negatives. So the positives are the graphics are really good, and they looked really clean and crisp, especially with my Frame Meister. I thought they looked really nice, and they're a very natural evolution to the styling of the original 3 games. So, like, I think that it's a natural fit for the older games. I think the graphics, have evolved from those games, and this is what they would look like. They kept the same art style, is what I'm trying to say, like, it feels like the same series, which is great, and I don't like that, because it has a very distinctive art style, and that's really cool. And all the redesigns, like Death and Frankenstein and all the other things from the first game, since it's like a pseudo remake of that, are here and they look great. Even Dracula looks good, that's all A-okay, I'm good with that. But, so then, okay, so that's great. The world looks great. Everything looks great. Like, all of it looks great. The animations look great. You're whipping in all of the directions. That's really cool. That's really versatile. That looks great. Just the level designs look great. I mean, I love all the levels. They're so distinctive. There's like, you just go everywhere, and then you get into the palace the castle or whatever, Dracula's castle, and there's certain things that like call back to the older Dracula's castles and the other games, which is kind of cool. It's just that's neat to me. I like that kind of stuff, especially the entrance to Dracula's castle is like just perfectly out of Castlevania 1, which is like really cool to me. So that's great. The music, is pretty top notch, I would say, especially the remixes of the old music, like really good music. That's still that's still par for the course, bar none. This is a series with great music at this point. Like I don't think they've really failed on the music yet in Castlevania games. Like it's all pretty memorable stuff, which is just great, and that's what Castlevania deserves. Is it as memorable as maybe like the first game? Probably not, but I mean, the first game's just so iconic. Has tracks in the first game, of course, and the second game and the third game, but um, yeah. So I thought the remixes were really well done, and also the new music is very catchy and it's very upbeat, and so that's cool. I really like that. Um, I guess some of I don't want to make this like a long thing. I just wanted to talk briefly about it because I don't know how much I have to say about it really. But some of the negatives. Then I'll get into that. Is just everything else pretty much. Like not everything else. I would say like it's cool. Everything else is pretty good. There's just some. It's really the level design that kind of sucks sometimes. Sometimes the level design is fine, but most of the time the level design kind of sucks. And I feel like they thought that, and a lot of other people think this too, but they Konami, when they made this game, felt like they had fixed up all the controls to be, perfect. So then when you're jumping on stairs and doing all this stuff and jumping on like the gears and stuff, they thought, oh, that'll be perfect. It'll show how far we've come since the NES, since number 3, where you're jumping on gears and stuff. And geez, they're so wrong. Maybe I'm just terrible at this. I was gonna say earlier, I don't really jive with the Super Nintendo controller for some reason. That's just like my weakest controller in terms of everything. It's a great controller for RPGs, I'll give it that, but when I'm playing like an action game, I just can't stand it because like I think it has to be this because I had the same problems with Super Metroid, and everyone says that that game controls like super great, and I just can't. I don't feel that, I feel that game is a little loose with its controls too, just like this game. And I feel like it's a Super Nintendo controller. I don't know what else it could be other than the fact, like, because I'm, generally when I play like an older game, I can be like, okay, these controls are pretty good. And I didn't think the controls are bad or anything. I just think they could have been tightened up more. Like all I heard about this game, going in, was a bunch of hype about it and how it's so good and it's like one of the best ones. And they fixed all the controls from the NES games. Then I play it and it's like, well, some of these jumps are just as stiff as the NES games, and maybe not so much because of like the stiffness of the jump even. It's really just because of the level design. Like I said, there's those gears like in the old games. And a lot of people are saying, oh, it's so much better, you can jump on the gears now. But like the gears are still just as bad because they still have the thing where the screen, like, what you're seeing on screen is it, sometimes. Sometimes, right? Because sometimes the level design and the levels are set up to where if you fall, you're just going to fall and you'll just go to the bottom of the screen, right? Okay. And other times they'll have it set up where the screen is just, as you move the screen up, like in the old games, or down, that's it. If you fall the bottom of the screen, that kills you. And I'm just like, this is really dumb. especially when there's some segments like, well, I want to talk about. Okay, well, there's just a bunch of segments where the screen is basically chasing you, or the screen is moving up, and it just gets really annoying because they set up stuff to where you can just easily fall off, or an enemy will hit you off. Like, the enemy placement in this game sometimes is a little bit bullshit, too. Like, I know the old games had that a little bit, especially 3, but I don't think 1 had that much of bullshit enemy placement. It felt like some Ninja Gaiden shit, where they just put it on a ledge, and, you need to get to that ledge and stuff, but like there's an enemy perfectly there to knock you off. I'm thinking of this one time. It's like there's this one level. It's one of the later levels. Is a part where it has everything. Actually, this one little segment has like everything that I've been talking about. So it has like a little gear thing, and it also has spikes above the gear thing. I haven't talked about the spikes yet, but the instant kill spikes are also so bullshit. That is so bad. That is so bad. None of the other games, as far as I remember, had that to this capacity. These one-hit kill spikes. So you have to crouch down as you're like turning on the gear thing, and then you get onto this little platform, and then there's this new mechanic in the game where your whip can attach to these little ring things, kind of like Rayman's fist that attaches to ring things and swings or whatever. But you swing, and there's a bunch of these things. They're on the top of the screen. You might know where I'm talking about by just the way I'm describing it. So you go on there, but there's like this platform over here with a staircase leading up to the next part. And sometimes there's just, for the most part, usually there's just one skeleton man, which is hard enough to do it, because he can, if he's in the right pattern, he can, as soon as you jump onto the platform, he can knock you off with this like super long sword. But sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's 4, literally. I've seen up to 4. Maybe there was even more at one point. I don't know what triggers all of them to spawn there or whatever, but it's just a ton of bullshit. I tell you, it's like it just happens, and that's all over in this game. They'll just place enemies on random platforms when they know you're going to be in an urgent mood to like try to be perfect, but you're gonna get knocked off because you don't know what's coming, that kind of thing. Like in the other Castlevanias, like, okay, sure, for the most part, if you didn't know what was coming, like maybe you would die, but you usually had like a chance to kind of like slide by as long as you kind of had quick reflexes. In this game, sometimes you just don't get that, you just don't get that. Like in the last level, is it thought? Okay, what was I gonna say? So, I don't know. Well, let's talk about the spikes first. These instant death spikes are like everywhere. And actually in the last level, yes, this is the last level, there's a part where you're on these little platforms. Oh, I know what I was gonna talk about. So, before I get to that, I just want to, because I just remember this. So there's staircases on the last level, and maybe elsewhere in the game, where they fall as you're walking up them. And so there's this one set of staircase. I mean, there's a lot of set of staircases like that in this final level, in like the final stretch before you kind of get to the boss rush and you get to Dracula or whatever. But it's such bullshit because you're walking up there, and there's actually, so if you just aren't fast enough, that's one thing. And you're going to have to jump to other ones. So if you don't know to hold the up button and whatever other direction you have to hold, you're just going to fall also, which sucks. Because, they don't, there's no way, you just have to kind of figure that shit out. And there's a little saw blade that, like, is chasing you up the whole way. It's really dumb. But anyway, there's a part where, when you jump on a platform, and this is one of them I'm thinking of, but like there's a bunch of those staircases that fall that well, okay, so especially there's this one where you have to jump to this other platform and you can bump your head on the platform above, which will trigger the staircase or whatever, and then you'll just be stuck there, so the saw blade has to come and kill you. That's dumb. But also there's another one where you can jump onto a platform that's above you where the staircase is, and if you just walk over this little gap or whatever to get to the candle thing on the other side, the staircase will start to fall, and then you're just fucked. And that happens a lot in that section, which is just really dumb in my opinion. So I didn't like that. I didn't like stuff like that. The instant death spikes were a little ridiculous and eccentric in this game. I don't really remember in the earlier levels, but I do remember in the later levels, especially um, the last level where you're jumping on these platforms that are going up. And it's like, I understand you need to have danger and whatever, but it's just like, it's just so stupid because you're going up, and maybe it's just the checkpoints or whatever, because, you know, once you die, you have to do all of this shit again. It's just like, fuck that. I don't want to do all of this again. But, like, you're going up on these little platforms that are, like, ascending, and you have to keep jumping on them, and you could run into spikes. You know, that's fine. Whatever. Sure. You have to figure out the right set of them to, like, go across to get to your goal. Okay, whatever. But why is it when I get to the platform and there's a part of the spike on the side, it's not pointing to the side, it's a part of the spike that's pointing down, and I go and bump against it, I die instantly. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't touch the spiky part of the spike, I touched the side of the spike. Nothing's gonna happen if I did that, you know? But it's programmed to kill you regardless, which is just dumb. I mean, that's not even the biggest problem. The problem is when you start to get to the top of there, right before the part where there's a checkpoint where you're going to fight all the bosses or whatever, they put a set of, like, really, like, almost impossible to dodge spikes there. If you didn't know they were coming, it would be impossible to dodge. You're pretty much going to have to retry there at least once. But the whole pattern is you just walk down on the down ones, and you have to, like, jump and stuff. It's like, once you know how to do it, it's not that hard, but it's just a bunch of bullshit that they would place all of these, like, instant kill spikes, and you only have, like, 5 lives or something, which is, like, you know, it's a pretty decent amount of lives. You only had, like, 3 in the old Castlevanias or whatever, but they make these levels, like, super, super long. If you die, you use all your lives, you have to go back. I mean, they're not that long, but, you know, it's really going to take a bunch of practicing to get good enough at all of the parts of the stage to do it. It's just kind of tedious. I know you had to do that in the old games, too. I'm just saying, this is kind of something I didn't really enjoy that too much about the game, but, I mean, there's I don't want to say those are minor complaints for me, because they're not. I mean, those were consistently the things that frustrated me the most about the game, was stuff like that, because everything else was pretty good. I mean, like, you know, it wasn't like the best, amazing, balls are 10 out of 10, my balls are blowing off 10 out of 10 kind of thing. I thought that, oh, hey, okay, he's being all hyper. I thought that, you know, I thought, like, the bosses were pretty cool for the most part. Um, you know, the atmosphere and the music and all that was just right. And just, you know, just the levels were pretty cool. None of them were too terribly hard until, like the second half of the game. Then it starts ramping up the difficulty, which is great. That's what you're supposed to do with your game. But, you know, a lot of the difficulty felt a little bit unfair, though, in terms of, like, the bullshit things like the spikes and, like, the gears and the platforming and all that, because this game isn't really refined for platforming. When you're in a boss fight, when you're doing combat, that's great. That's all working out, you know, pretty good. But the level design sometimes, and the enemy placement especially, is just kind of not so great sometimes. But, you know, you take the good with the bad. So, you know, you have all the aesthetic stuff is great, and the music and stuff is great, but, you know, you're kind of, I mean, there's some good levels and some good level design, enemy placement and stuff, and then some of them are kind of bullshit, you know? So I'm just saying, I'm just calling it like it is. You know, there was a complaint by, I think Eageraptor might have been, like, the first one to kind of start this, but he was saying that the whip is super overpowered in this game, and you use that more than the weapons, like the throwing items and stuff. Like, yeah, I would agree with that, and I don't know if that's necessarily a complaint, like, because the cross and the cross and, like, a few other ones like that. And the stopwatch was in this game, and I never even used that. But the cross, pretty much the cross, I would say, it was pretty good. I definitely used that on Dracula, because you kind of need it, especially in the last phase with the lightning. I guess that's the one thing I didn't really like about Dracula, was the lightning stage at the end, because it's like, you don't really know where the lightning's gonna strike. The other two phases felt pretty fair though. Like even the fire things felt pretty fair because like you can usually dodge it. I mean it's a little shoddy sometimes, but you can usually dodge it. Um, his attacks or whatever that he shoots, you can always, as long as you have your timing down, it's pretty manageable. And I like that. I like that they didn't necessarily make you have an item like in the older games. So it's a double-edged sword or double-edged whip if you like. But that the whip is so much better now that you don't necessarily need the alternate weapons, which is great because then they can just design everything around the whip, um, and you know they don't necessarily have to have you have the alternate weapons. You know, that can be an optional thing if you want to make the boss fights a little bit easier, which is great because then, you know, your main weapon, the whip, they can design all of the combat around that weapon, not like, okay, they are probably going to need the cross here or something. They're probably going to need the holy water here, or this boss is so much easier with the holy water or the cross. No, it's like you have the whip. The whip is so versatile, and it's great that because if you continue, you're not going to have your item anymore. And if it doesn't respawn there, then you're just kind of fucked, especially if you're on a boss like Dracula, where you spawn in front of the boss, which doesn't happen very often, but I'm just saying. Um, it's nice that the whip is still good enough to get you through that kind of stuff, and so it's not as good that they didn't focus on the alternate weapons because you know, why put them in the game then? But like they also had a little bit of utility in the game, so I'm not really gonna complain about that. They are called alternate weapons for a reason. You're using your whip, that's your main weapon. So okay, what? Why did you come here if you don't want me to pet you? Whatever. So you're using yeah. So you know the alternate weapons. Whatever. Like I understand that complaint, but I think that they were still well enough implemented. You know, you didn't always use them quite as much, and so it did make getting the heart things a little less impactful. But I still did it anyway, just because, you know. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I don't really have so much to say about the game. That's pretty much it. I liked the game overall. I didn't think it was a masterpiece or anything. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it, you know, it it was definitely the Super Nintendo version of Castlevania. Let's put it that way. I'm just kind of hoping that games like Bloodlines and Rondo of Blood and those kind of games maybe will control slightly better. Maybe not. I don't think they probably will, but just hopefully. Because those are the two games that I need to play before I get to Symphony of the Night. Hopefully Symphony of the Night controls pretty well because that would suck if that didn't control very well because I do want to play that game because it's one of those, you know, really hyped up games like Final Fantasy VII, another game I need to get to. I gotta play 6 first, but I gotta play 5 first, maybe. I don't think I want to play 5 anymore, though. I played enough of Final Fantasy 5. I'm not really the biggest of Final Fantasy people, but I want to play 7 just because it feels like one of those games that, you know, culturally or whatever, and 6, because a lot of people talk good about 6 as well. So, you know, I mean, I'm getting off track. I don't know. Um, my point is, I just don't think that Super Castlevania 4 maybe is as good as everyone is saying. I think it's still good. I just don't think it's like the 10 out of 10 masterpiece that everyone else thinks it is. That's just my opinion. Um, you know, I'd probably give it like a 7.5 or something. It was pretty good, you know. Or maybe like a 7.8. It's close to an 8 because, you know, there were some flaws, but I mean, it was pretty fun overall. It was frustrating in all the right ways and all the wrong ways sometimes as well, but like I felt like Dracula was a really cool fight overall. It wasn't necessarily as good as maybe any of the other Dracula. I think it's probably one of the better Dracula fights. Probably maybe the best one. I don't know. The one in 3 was like just super stupid hard. So I don't know. I think yeah, it was probably maybe one of the better ones. I just liked the combat. I think the combat was really solid in this game. It was just marred down by a bunch of the level design and the enemy placement to where you weren't always going to get to use the combat quite as well because you're at a disadvantage of where you're placed in the level, you know? That's why the boss fights are so cool, is because it's actually one of your only times you can, without restrictions for the most part, go nuts with your combat, which is great, you know? So I think that's also why fights like Dracula shine a lot, because it is just you and him, and it's all about your combat, and it's, you know, about your skills to dodge and jump and whip in different directions and stuff. And I just thought that was cool. It was a really good culmination of the things that, the innovations that this game added to the series. So I'm excited about the games going forward. Might be a while before I get to Rondo of Blood and all the other ones, but, you know, I still don't even know how I'm going to play Rondo of Blood. I think maybe what is it, the PSP one, but, like, from what I understand, sorry, from what I understand, it came out on PS4 as well, so that might be good. Plus Symphony of the Night is also on there, but so that'd be good. But yeah, I'll have to play those sometime, and I'll get back to you on how those are. But Castlevania 4, pretty good overall. Not the best Castlevania, but you know, pretty top tier, like a mid to high tier Castlevania. So right now my rankings would be probably 1, 3, 4, 2. So maybe 4 would be better than 3. I don't know. It's been a while since I played 3. I just remember how hard 3 was. So maybe 4 would be above 3, because it was just pretty frustrating, 3. But it is also a good game too, I would say. It's not a game I'm going to go back to anytime soon. I've gone back to the first Castlevania a bunch of times, so if that says anything. It's a game that's... The NES ones are a lot better enjoyed with save states, I'll put it that way. So, you know, if you're going to play them, probably do it that way, or play them on... Do they have that on the NES Classic? I don't know. I think they have Super Castlevania 4 on the SNES Classic. Could have played it that way. That might have helped. But I didn't. I played it the old-fashioned way. I wanted it to look really good on the Framemeister, and it did look really good. That's I'd say Super Nintendos are pretty good on my Framemeister. That's one of the better systems on there. Still haven't fixed N64 with the Framemeister, because, you know, you can't really get it. Emulation's probably your best bet on N64. So, but that's off topic. So I'm just gonna end this thing. You know, Castlevania 4, pretty good game overall. I would say play it if you like the other previous Castlevania games. Judge for yourself, you know. And yeah, this has been JZNES saying keep it classic. Stick around for more reviews, underrated games, and I'll see you in the next one. JZ out.